Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So we're just going to start right now and more people might join us in the future. Oh, okay. Cool. So first off, thank you so much to everyone who is coming. It is all of you guys who are trying to make this possible. So first off, before we hand off our spotlight to Mr. Josh McGuire, we're just going to talk briefly about what our project is specifically about. So as you guys probably know, this is a set of meetings launched by our project, FlashCareer, which is a part of our initiative, which is a student-run nonprofit organization called Corp. And FlashCareer is essentially a series of webinars introducing different career paths. And tonight, we're particularly focusing on the industry of law. And today, our guest speaker is Mr. Joshua McGuire, and we're extremely, extremely grateful that he could be here with us today. One sec, I'm trying to get to the next slide. Oh my God. Sorry. Okay, cool. Yes, I'm technically kind of incapable, but who we are, we're basically a student-run organization that focuses on helping students in high school and college. Our goal is to inspire passion for learning as well as encourage students to become active in their communities. And part of our cause is specifically to spur passion in learning, because both Jocelyn and I face so many students in our environment who learn because of external pressures, either for college, for GPA, or under the pressure from their parents. And therefore, through launching different projects like our summer tutoring program, we really hope to spur passion in learning. Because we also know that what determines the future isn't necessarily which college you go to or what kind of GPA you have, but really it's spurred by your passion for the different kind of career path that you want to take, and ultimately the creativity that goes into all of this thinking process.
So what we do, so we have a free tutoring program, as Lisa mentioned earlier, and we also have like easy, understandable textbooks in hopes of inspiring students to truly love learning.
And our podcast, blogs, and interview series were created to inspire students to initiate extracurricular activities and encourage the youth to apply the skills they learned at school to better the real world.
And our FlashCareer program, this program, is a series of Zoom webinars lectured by professional guest speakers. It's also designed to help students find a career they're passionate about so they can better focus their efforts in a particular direction.
So the last thing is basically here are like our website, our Instagram, and our Facebook. And basically, if you're interested in any of our future events, so please type your email address in the chat box and enter our email chain essentially. And we also have a WeChat group chat. So the picture is basically the QR code for that. So if you're interested in any of our future events, please scan the QR code and essentially join the group chat. And now we're going to officially turn the spotlight to Mr. Josh McGuire. Yay.
Thank you very much. I am enormously pleased to be the inaugural speaker, and I feel a fair amount of pressure as the first career representative doing one of these talks. But hopefully I will give you enough information about the career of law, and it's funny because you say we're focusing on the industry of law. It turns out that's a really broad area. There's a lot of different careers you can have within law, and that's what part of what I want to talk to you about this evening. But hopefully give you a chance to both appreciate the profession as sort of an important and necessary part of what holds the fabric of society together, and if it's an exciting possibility for you, to encourage you to pursue it. To that end, I've got, I think watching my face and my mouth just sort of moving for 50 minutes would drive anybody crazy. So I've got a PowerPoint, so at least we can be looking at interesting images while while I'm telling you a thing or two. So I will do that. And my screen should now be successfully shared with everybody, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah, terrific. So the title of my presentation is itself a bit of a joke because the path, or not even a joke, maybe just an illusion. The Path of the Law is a very famous book by Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a member of the Supreme Court from 1902 to 32, but mostly is known as being one of the most influential judges in his creation of what we call the common law. I'll have a brief sort of law school-esque digression here to tell you that there's two different sort of sources of law that we deal with in figuring out what, when you say, you know, is that against the law, or what does the law say about that? There's two sources. One is statutes, which is anything that Congress passes that becomes a law. And I think most of you learned about that in civics class or its U.S. history equivalent. But then there's also a whole body of law that's just based on the idea of precedent and what we've done in the past, where, yes, the law gets defined in certain ways by statutes, but then there's also the sort of progress of that law and the way in which it changes over time based on how judges interpret it and apply it to a particular set of facts. And, excuse me, our system, which is, of course, derived from the English system, includes both that statutory law and something called common law. And Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes was one of the best writers and deciders and thinkers about judicial decisions and his common law. So he wrote a book that's called The Path of the Law, which describes sort of that process of how law changes over time and the sort of philosophy behind that. So that's the sort of tongue-in-cheek aspect of my title here. Quick overview of what I'm going to talk to you about this evening. We'll talk about the profession as a whole, the good parts, the bad parts, what it's like to go through law school, what it's like to work at a big firm, which is what a lot of people do after law school, but not all of them. The idea of doing corporate law or litigation, the sort of two main divisions of law that people practice, a few other specialty fields beyond that. What it's like to engage in law, not just as a profession, but as a business, a variety of different ways that one can practice law, other paths other than just sort of being what you think of as being a lawyer or working at a firm. And then a couple thoughts on sort of where the profession is going in the future. So there, by the way, is Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes there on that first picture there. And there's a couple other pictures on this page for a reason. Law is referred to as a profession, and in the sort of classical sense, professions were originally areas of work in which you used specialized knowledge that you gained through study to apply a set of principles, things that we think are the right way to do things, to solve specific problems that are presented to you. And classically, there were three main professions: medicine, law, and the clergy, all of which are things that require specialized knowledge achieved through a lot of study, and then using that knowledge to deal with problems that people bring you and how to solve them, hopefully in creative ways or effective ways. They are also traditionally areas of employment that are, oops, I went too quickly, shame on me. There we go. Areas of employment that are usually pretty well respected, mostly because they have this sort of specialized knowledge element to them. They're governed, all three of those and many others that we would call professions, they're governed by a set of ethics. There are rules not just for, not just laws about how you do it, but sort of ethical rules about how you go about doing that. In medicine, of course, it's the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. Law has a whole bunch of ethical rules that govern your relationship with clients and with other lawyers and judges. Because there is a certain barrier to entry because of the amount of knowledge that you have to have going in, they were sort of protected professions. These are areas of employment that can be difficult to enter. Law has you required to pass the bar and become licensed. Same thing with medicine, of course. The clergy has its own set of values that hurdles that you have to pass before you can begin admission. And then the best thing about these professions, I think, generally, is that you are engaged in creative problem solving on an almost daily basis. No day is going to look like any other day. When you're practicing law, when you're practicing medicine, if you're a member of the clergy, any of these classical professions, that was supposed to be one of the best things about them, was that what you were wrestling with and what you were doing varied from day to day. Okay, so what are the best parts about being a lawyer? By the way, when you talk about the best lawyers out there, of course, on the right-hand side is the notorious RBG. And the black and white photo up top, the man with his finger in the air, is Clarence Darrow. Clarence Darrow, one of the most famous trial attorneys in legal history, known for the Scopes Monkey trial, which was recorded in Inherit the Wind, fantastic play, and they've made a couple movies out of it. They're mostly pretty good. But as he was sort of known for that, but he was also a really successful criminal defense attorney. He never had a single client get sentenced to death. He had plenty of capital cases, murder cases and the like. Very, very effective defense attorney. Had some quirks about him as well. But so when we think about, you know, what it means to be a lawyer and the best aspects of the profession, they involve a lot of things that we think of as important values. They involve persuasion. They involve improving society. They involve, you know, getting a concept and idea, communicating it effectively to other people, and helping people solve problems and work with important issues. Also serving as a voice for people who don't have one, protecting people's rights. When you wake up in the morning and you say, you know, what am I going to do today? And you get to think of some of what you're doing has to do with all that kind of stuff. It's kind of cool. It really isn't to be overlooked that as an attorney on a day-to-day basis, I help people solve problems. That's the sort of most practical aspect of and it includes not just sort of fighting on their behalf, but also giving them good advice. And it also includes giving people a voice who don't have one or who have trouble explaining themselves. So personally, I am a solo practitioner and a litigator, and I do a lot of trial work. And what I think of trials as is competitive storytelling. And the best part about that is the idea that you are helping somebody tell their story effectively who otherwise would have some trouble telling it themselves. I'll get back to sort of my personal path a little later in here. But for right now, sort of 30,000-foot view, that's part of what's great about being a lawyer. Things that are not so great about being a lawyer. Well, for one thing, it tends to be a lot of work. Lawyers have a lot of trouble achieving work-life balance, depending on what aspect of the profession you pick and which avenue you pursue. That can be harder with some than it is with others. Overall, lawyers face a lot of burnout. They sometimes have psychological and substance abuse problems because of that. And a lot of the work, sort of day-to-day work, can be very tedious. Stacks and stacks of documents we associate with what it is to be a lawyer, whether you're a criminal, civil attorney, or you're doing business law and deals, corporate law, things like that. There's no end of pieces of paper. One of the piece of advice I received when I joined a big firm was that I should get stock in a paper company. So at least I'd feel good about the fact that we killed trees all the time. Now, as the profession has moved a little bit more towards electronic documents, I think that and a bunch of other industries have gotten better about that. But the fact is, there's still a lot of tedious work that goes along with this stuff. I was speaking to my mom earlier today. She was also an attorney. Both my parents were attorneys, actually, and my aunt and my uncle and my cousin and her husband. So I was number 7 in the family, which means that it was probably difficult for me to escape it. But in any event, my mom said, yeah, practicing law, 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. So yeah, it's hard work. But if you like what you do and you enjoy it, an 80-hour, work week can feel like it's nothing if you're really having fun. And if you're miserable doing what you're doing, well, 20 hours feels like an eternity. The other sort of negative aspects of practicing law in general, there's a challenge, depending on what you're doing, with getting and retaining clients. That has its own set of stresses associated with it. And overall, the job security within the practice of law, which I think is true in most professions and a lot of industries within the United States, but job security used to be job security in law was absolute guarantee, not a problem. You get a job, you keep it as long as you want. A lot harder to keep your job these days, a lot more movement within the profession, both for good and for bad. The ugly part about being an attorney. Well, there's a lot of ideas that people have about attorneys. We carry around with us both sort of respect as lawyers and also a lot of preconceived notion of what we're like, not all of them positive. I'm using cartoons for all of these examples because, of course, cartoons are just exaggerated impressions about the real world. But, you know, Americans have a love-hate relationship with lawyers. And so whether it's Lionel Hutz there in the upper left, who is the Simpsons version of an attorney, who's totally incompetent, will do anything to make a buck, and who just, you know, looks for every opportunity to gain an edge. Or just the simple illustration in the top right there, the idea that lawyers will say whatever it takes to get their client off, even if that means that they have to lie while they're doing it. They're not a very trustworthy people, you know, that and used car salesman, maybe. Or maybe a little bit less of a common preconception, but the one that I have in this quick video I'm going to show from King of the Hill here, which I thought was a good illustration of one of the other things people think about lawyers that isn't so great. Let's see if I can get that to play.
Therefore, after referred to as dang old aforementioned antiquities pursuant to the public domain title 97 of the State Resource Code, but I tell you what, man, they're tight. Boomhauer, I didn't understand a word you just said. Damn legalese.
So yeah, there's a perception that lawyers use a lot of their knowledge and skill to make things inaccessible to other people. And that they use it to sort of hide the truth and to bury the meaning in documents. And we have all sorts of, you know, legal forms that you have to look through from time to time. You say, my God, you know, they had lawyers who created this thing just to hide from me whatever it is that they're actually trying to do. So day to day, as an attorney, you know, you carry with you the sort of burden of that perception, that the practice of law isn't anything more than the pursuit of mistruths in various forms in order to get some advantage for your client. And unfortunately, it's also the case that due to the overall decline of professionalism, sometimes that's true. There are certainly plenty of bad lawyers out there giving the profession a bad name. So, suppose that despite all that, you actually decide, hey, this is the career for me. I want to go to law school. And I absolutely encourage you to do that if that's what you really want to do. What I really discourage people from doing is going to law school because they can't think of anything better to do. And you'll meet a lot of people in law school who are there for just that reason, and they tend not to do very well, and they tend to be pretty miserable. Law school is sort of like taking something that you think you might enjoy and then being force-fed it for 3 long years and seeing whether or not you still like it at the end of that. And if you went in there really, really loving it, then it's 3 great years. It can be a lot of fun. But the mantra about law school, and the reason I've got these particular 3 pictures up here on the screen, is that your 3 years go scare you to death, work you to death, bore you to death. And to a certain extent, that is true, because the first year of law school, the reason law school exists is to help you, they say, to think like a lawyer. What it really means is to adjust your set of skills and almost your intuition so that for any particular question that you're wrestling with, you're accustomed to looking at both sides of a particular debate and being able to argue from either side and being able to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of any given position, which, if you're thinking about it as almost a critical piece of civics, is something that everybody should know how to do. It's essential to public discourse, to having debates with people, to trying to understand other people's point of view. The idea that you should be looking at both sides of an issue and figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of both, that's something that everybody ought to do. But in law school, you learn to do that in a very specific way and at a really rapid pace and in a really, a lot of hard thinking. And going into that as somebody who's never done it before and being quizzed or have the possibility of being quizzed by your law professor on a daily basis is a little bit terrifying. So that's the scare you to death part. Year 2, you're doing all of that same stuff that you did in the first year, plus you're also looking at clerkships. Maybe you're working on a journal. Maybe you also have some sort of an internship or working for a professor, whatever it is, such that it's the same amount of work plus a little bit more. And being a law student and doing it properly is something like a 70 or 80 hour a week job. And so the idea that your second year, you're layering stuff on top of that, well, yeah, you do feel like you're sort of being worked to death at both ends. But by your third year, you more or less have it all figured out. You know how to get through classes. You know which ones you want to take. You're taking things that are sort of more for your interest than because you feel like you really need to know about them. And the reality is that law school only needs to be about 2 years long. The third year of law school exists so that we can have sort of more legal scholarship. And as a third year that you're then paying for as a sort of support for that legal scholarship, and in turn makes your debt that much bigger because law school debt is substantial. And it's part of the reason that people end up feeling like they have to go to a big firm after law school so they can get some money to pay back some of those loans. So in that sense, you can think about the third year of law school as being the large firms underwriting legal scholarship because they pay the people who just came out of there a lot of money so that they can pay back the law school, which in turn can pay its professors to do more scholarship. That's maybe a little bit of a cynical view about it, but the reality is third year of law school, find a hobby, find something else cool to do with yourself. Or you can do what I did, which is to do a clinic. I got to do a criminal appellate clinic where we wrote briefs on behalf of a person who wanted to do a criminal appeal and couldn't afford a lawyer. So getting into law school, yeah, you got to take the LSAT. You'll study for that. You get good grades. You find your someplace to go to law school. And reality is, despite this sort of negative publicity of scare you to death, work you to death, bore you to death, if you really like this profession, if this is the right thing for you, it's a lot of fun because you're spending, 3 years studying the heck out of something that, you really want to be able to do and do well. But at the end of that, you don't actually know how to do anything at all. You spent 3 years studying law. You understand the principles. You understand what the law is about, how it works, the path of the law, as Holmes would say. But you don't know how to do anything at all. If somebody set you up in a law office right that very moment and sent your first client in the door, you wouldn't have the foggiest idea what to do. So most people, after they spend 3 years at a law firm, or at least a lot of people, 3 years in law school, sometimes they clerk for a year or so. They go work for a judge, and they learn how to write, and they learn about the law a little bit more. But mostly they go then to work for a big law firm in one of the major cities. Boston, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, any of the other big cities out there. You go work for a firm. And basically your first 3 or so years at the law firm is the equivalent of doing like a medical residency. So in med school, you spend, a few years learning the actual textbook stuff, your Gray's Anatomy, all that stuff. And then you start doing rotations in your residency so that you can actually learn how to do stuff. Law school ends with just the book learning part. And then wherever you're working after that, they're the ones training you how to do things, how to write a brief, how to research an issue, how to write a memo, how to write a letter, how to argue in court, how to take a deposition, how to do due diligence for a business deal. All of that stuff you end up learning on the job. Now, the cool part about that, of course, is that you're getting paid to do it. And that's important because you got to pay back those law school loans. And so you need to be making some money. The bad part about working for a law firm is that they expect you to work a lot. And over the last 2 or 3 decades, that number has sort of steadily crept upward. When I was at a big firm right after law school, your expectation, they measure everything in billable hours. Billable hours when you're working for a client on a matter that the firm can charge that client for. Not when you're chatting with your friend in the hallway, not when you're having lunch, but actually at your desk doing work. That's billable time. And you have to record that time and keep track of it to describe what it was that you did during that period of time so that they can send an invoice to the client, and the client is going to say, why am I paying all this money? Well, because this person did these tasks and that took them, and it's measured in decimals. So a decimal of an hour, for those of you who are really good at math, is 6 minutes, right? 1/10 of an hour. So when you're working for a law firm, or even that, for that matter, when you're practicing right now as I am, you live your life in 6-minute increments. Point 1 is 6 minutes, point 2, 12 minutes. You write that down on your timesheet. That's what I did. Here's what I did for that amount of time. So when I was working at the firm, the billable hours expectation for associates was 1,850 per year, 1850. I sat down and did the math once. If you took all of your vacation, we got 4 weeks, and all of the holidays and your weekends, that meant that on any given day, you should be billing 8.1 hours. Now, you think to yourself, well, that's not so hard. I mean, that's, 8 hours a day. That's just like a 9-to-5 job, right? Maybe a little bit of lunch, and I add to that in one direction or the other. Yeah, except that billing 8.1 hours really requires you to be in the office for more like 10 hours, because not every hour that you're at your desk is 100% productive. You spend time talking to colleagues, you spend time walking from your room to the partner's room to get instructions, you spend time in trainings, you spend time in this, that, and the other thing. So really, 10 hours a day. So think of that as, 8 in the morning till 6 at night, including lunch. That seems like a pretty good work day, or 9 till 7, whatever you say. Okay, that's a great work day. Now I've spent that time at work. I've billed my 8.1 hours a day. I can take all of my vacations, weekends, and I have a pretty good life. What that means, though, is that every non-billable activity, every training session that you go to, which isn't work for a client, but just training that you're getting, every socializing event, every networking event, every meeting that the firm has, so that you can have a firm meeting on, HR policy or how the firm is doing, anything like that. A social lunch, anything like that is by definition coming out of your evenings, your weekends, your holidays, your vacations. Now, 1850 was the minimum at my firm. If you really were serious about making partner, and this is true at most other firms as well, you'd be working more like 2,000 hours a year, billing 2,000 hours a year. So on top of that 1850, you're definitely doing a lot more work, and that's also definitely coming out of your evenings, your weekends, etc. You're doing that work for demanding partners who sometimes want you just, to wait until they have some work for you, or they suddenly say, well, I really need you to come in tomorrow, that being a Saturday or Columbus Day or whatever. Some of them can be easy to work with, some of them can be difficult to work with, but you got to work with them all. The nice thing is that while you're doing all that, you're making a ton of money, so you can sort of buy your way out of any particular problem that you have, although you're also using that to pay off your loans. When I was doing this, my wife is also an attorney. She and I were working at big firms at the same time. It was before we had kids, thankfully. And the nice thing about having a spouse who was going through the same thing was that when I made the phone call to her that said, okay, honey, I know that we had dinner plans that I confirmed with you just a half an hour ago, and that 20 minutes from now we're supposed to be meeting at that restaurant. But this partner just called me up, and I now have to do this thing, so I'm going to, in fact, be here till 11 o'clock at night. Dinner is canceled. I'm probably going to have to be here all weekend, and so that plan that we had to get away, that's probably also out the window. Her response was, okay, because she knew what that world was like. If you're married to somebody who's not in that world, it can be a little bit more stressful, and it requires a little more understanding about what it is that you're in fact doing there for that period of time when you're learning everything that there is to do to be a lawyer. Now, in my case, I started out working for a law firm, and then after a few years, I said, okay, now I've learned all that stuff. Now I want to go learn a bunch of other stuff, like how to actually take depositions, argue in court, and have trials. Something that law firms really have a lot of trouble giving you experience to do, because these are big firms, they've got big important clients, and the clients are so important and paying so much money that they'd really much rather have somebody who's very experienced do their work for them, thank you very much. And so when it's time to do things like that, they have the partners do it. So if you want that kind of experience, you could do what I did and go work for the Attorney General's office, or you could go work for a prosecutor's office or the U.S. Attorney's office or something like that, where they're happy to give younger people the opportunity to do those sorts of things, only you make a lot less money. When I went from the law firm to the Attorney General's office, I took a 75% pay cut. And when I first started there, I was actually a net financial drain on my household. My net was less than what the nanny grossed to take care of the kids. But I learned how to do trials, and I learned how to take depositions because I got to do a bunch of that stuff. Then after I did that for a few years, I decided it was time to go back into private practice. So I worked for a few smaller firms for a few years before finally saying, you know what, I think it's time to do this for myself. So in 2012, 8 years ago, I hung out my own shingle. I started my own law practice where it's just me. Sometimes I have a paralegal working for me, depending on if I have one at the time. And right now I do civil litigation, which is helping people fight about money. I don't keep people out of jail. I don't do certain other specialized kind of things. But if people want to sue each other about employment stuff, contract stuff, torts, all sorts of things, I'm happy to help them do that. And I help them solve their problems, and I give them advice, and I fight with other people, and occasionally I get to have trials. I'm one of the attorneys who thinks that trials are a lot of fun. There are actually not too many attorneys who think that way. Most of them would just as soon avoid trials. Me, I've always enjoyed them. So back to at the firm. When you're at the firm, you have two sort of basic divides. And when you join the firm, you then have to sort of decide which of these two big decisions you're going to make for what happens in your career. The rest of my career is either going to be spent doing corporate law or doing litigation. That's your first sort of big decision after law school when you join a firm. And some people will drift back and forth from one to the other, but that's pretty rare. Mostly you say at that point, I'm going to either have a career path that goes to corporate law or a career path that's litigation. Corporate law means I help people do business deals. I help them do mergers and acquisitions. I help them write contracts. I help them enter into agreements, licensing agreements. I help them acquire businesses. I help them do all sorts of things that allow businesses to operate effectively with advice from attorneys on how best to do that within the law and how to do it effectively. Versus litigation. Everybody knows, by the way, that that's a screenshot from my very, very favorite law movie, My Cousin Vinny. If you like the law at all, you should go watch My Cousin Vinny. Very, very funny movie. Good courtroom scenes. Litigation, you're helping people fight. If it's civil litigation, you're helping them fight about money. If it's criminal litigation, you're helping society fight with criminals as to whether or not they should belong in jail or some other form of punishment, or whether they should go free. So that's the sort of big, big divide at the beginning. The biggest difference between those, well, so the corporate law people are helping out people who are happy. They're doing a deal. They're full of optimism. They're the beginning of a relationship. They're excited about what comes next. You're helping them do something that they want to accomplish. Litigators are coming with people who are having some sort of a problem that they need solved. They're unhappy about the problem. Sometimes they've been sued. They don't have control over that. They're not happy about that. And you're sort of managing that problem with them. They tend to be less happy about the whole process. Each of those two forms of law has its own species of drudgery for people who are working within the law firm who are junior associates, people who are just starting out. In corporate law, you have to, when you're the most junior person on the team, what you're doing is called due diligence. If two companies are going to do business together, well, I have to know what that other company is doing. So I have to actually, they say, well, we're doing this amount in sales. Well, I got to look through their sales records. I got to look through their employment records. I got to see if they've had litigations in the past that could cause problems. I got to check that their licenses are what they're supposed to be, that they own the intellectual property they say they do. Somebody has to go through and read all those pieces of paper and let people know, yep, they check out just the way they're supposed to. In litigation, at the big firm level, these are people who are involved in fights, usually with big companies. Those big companies have to produce documents to the other side to show the evidence in their case in response to discovery requests. And so there's tons and tons of paper to look through, whether it's the paper that your side is supposed to be sending, and before you send it, somebody ought to look through it to see what it says or to see if it's responsive, or the stuff the other side has produced that we have to look through it to see where the important information is to help us with our case. So you do document review. When I first started at the firm, they used associates for document review a lot more than they do now. Now they use more contract attorneys for it. But I had colleagues who, for the first 2 years of their careers, did nothing but sit in front of a computer screen and click through looking at documents to code them for essentially, their 8.1 hours a day, and that was it. So when you're starting off, everybody starts at the bottom, and you have to, put in your time. At the same time, you're learning other things, particularly if you're paying attention and getting partners to tell you what they're doing. But that's the sort of two document-intensive species of drudgery. The real divide between corporate law and litigation is, what type of a problem is it that I'm helping my clients solve? Am I helping them to structure a business deal to advance their business, to figure out a good way to do business? Or am I helping them win a legal fight with some other entity where they're having a disagreement? Okay. That's not the only two things you can do within the law, of course. There's corporate law at big firms. There's litigation at big firms. There's also a few other specialties out there. Just by way of example, there's patent law, which helps people protect discoveries that they've made and get protection for those discoveries and fight with other people about whose discovery belongs to them. Criminal law, I mentioned earlier, keeping people out of jail or putting them in there jail. Helping people through the immigration process. Helping people navigate family law, both divorces, child custody, things of that nature. Trust and estates, helping people do planning for end of life or for keeping money flowing to people who need it. Employment law, I got fired from my job and I shouldn't have. I'm going to sue them. I do a fair amount of that stuff. Trademark and copyright, the other species of intellectual property. Labor law, negotiating and entering into agreements on behalf of unions or other large segments of the workforce. Alternative dispute resolution, helping people solve problems in a different way, either as an arbitrator or a mediator, helping them negotiate. Appellate law, all those laws that get formed at the appellate level, circuit court decisions, just arguing those. There's people who just do that stuff every day, all day long. Environmental law, particularly recently with things like wind farms, getting the permits for that stuff, suing to protect environmental disasters, things of that nature. Tax law, people need tax advice. How do I structure this? How much do I have to pay? Is there a better way to do this? Municipal law, including telling your own city and town what laws they have to follow and how to go ahead and enact laws in a way that's constitutional that governs your own city or town. Eminent domain, the power of taking in order to do things that government wants to do. I want to build a highway through here, so we have to take your land and then we have to pay you for it, and somebody's going to help us argue about how much it's worth. Personal injury law, of course, people are in car accidents all the time, and that's a very important thing to get compensated. Medical malpractice, another species of personal injury. Doctors occasionally make mistakes. Sometimes they pay you for it. Sometimes you have to have somebody help you fight for that. International law, helping companies understand the ramifications of trade deals, things of that nature. There's also international criminal law. Bankruptcy law, helping people restructure their businesses or their personal assets when things have gotten to the point where they can't continue on as they're doing it. So what it means to be a lawyer varies in a whole bunch of different ways. So the people who do each of these different things have a very different way that their day looks and what it is that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and a whole area of specialized knowledge. Now, if you're in any of these firms or working for yourself, as I do, if you do any of those specialties on behalf of clients, well, you need to get the clients, you need to keep the clients, and you need to have those clients pay you and not sort of skip out on the check. The business of law is increasingly a big part of what it is that you have to do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you can continue to do what you want to do. The clients don't just beat down your door and come find you. You have to do marketing. You have to figure out how much to charge and who to charge and how to structure your deals. There's some lawyers who do things on a contingency fee basis, some people who do it just fee for service, some flat rate, some like me who charge by the hour or also do some contingency work. And increasingly, particularly at the big firms, it's become a lot more about making lots of money, which is why the hours pressure has gone up, why billable rates have gone up. And the implication of that is that there are some clients who can afford you and some clients who need to find other smaller, cheaper firms, or all the way down to people like me. Because I work for myself, because I have a small office, because I have low overhead, because it's just me and not a big fancy office or a lot of people working for me, I can afford to charge clients less money and take on smaller cases. But even then, it still costs a fair amount of money to get any amount of justice in this system. So, and I guess the other thing to say about the fact that law is increasingly a business is that businesses are run on the basis of efficiency, not necessarily about the other sort of noble aspects of the profession. You have to make sure that, yes, we want to help people solve problems and embody important ideals and protect people's rights. But at the end of the day, I still have to take home a paycheck to make that happen. And it's also even true within government work. I mean, government work alleviates many of those pressures, but it's also the case that, the government has to find a budget in order to pay its lawyers to do things. And you sort of have to justify, why the government should be spending that money on these lawyers. So there's a certain amount of, you think of it as not as marketing, but at least as justifying your own bottom line. Okay, so what are the other things I could be doing if I'm not, working for a firm or hanging out a shingle and making money that way is the way we think of most lawyers making their money? Well, you could work at a big firm, or you could work at a smaller firm, or you could be a solo practitioner like me. You could also work for a company. Companies have their own lawyers. They're usually called in-house counsel. Some of those tend to be litigators, helping them navigate disputes with other people. But a lot of those are the corporate attorneys, helping them structure their human resources department, helping them make other decisions. We have an entire judiciary branch of our government. People who are lawyers make money as judges. You can become a judge, whether that's sitting at a federal court or a small municipal court. There are hundreds of judges in Massachusetts who make an important difference to people's lives on a daily basis. There's also something called an ALJ. People don't know much about this, but it's an administrative law judge. In addition to the regular legal system, what we think of as filing lawsuits, there's also plenty of administrative processes, things like appeals of taxes or appeals of workman's comp decisions or insurance, where there are judges who specialize in that area who make decisions on that stuff, hearing cases day in and day out, but who work for an administration in order to do that. I mentioned alternative dispute resolution earlier. People work as mediators and arbitrators, helping people reach conclusions that way. Certainly you can work for the government. I mean, the government does a lot of things, including prosecute people. You can work in a prosecutor's office, but also sort of within, the governor's office. He has plenty of attorneys working for him. The Attorney General's office, where I worked for a little bit. And of course, as with every other profession, there's also the option of teaching. A lot of people make good living, have a really great work-life balance teaching law school. They're hard jobs to get, but very rewarding. So just a few quick words on where I think this is heading before I take questions for a few minutes. And you think it's a little bit weird, the two pictures I have up here, but let me explain. First, the law profession, just like every other job in America, is subject to a certain degree to automation and bureaucratization. No, we can't exactly be replaced by lawyers, but there's also a degree to which some of the things that we do can be routinized, can be made easier through technology, can be made less important through technology. So here's a good example. When I started out, all those people who are my peers who were clicking through documents to review them, they now have sophisticated algorithms and programs that are capable of looking through the documents for you, analyzing the text and saying, look, here are all the ones about damages, probably right here. You don't need somebody to look through every single page. Now, you still want somebody to sort of, quarterback that process to make sure it's being done correctly and check everything, but fewer attorneys are needed for that. It's also the case that a lot of legal work is becoming sort of more routine. If the profession was, I'm going to use my specialized skills and knowledge to take a new set of facts and apply my knowledge to it, well, bureaucratization is, okay, looks like one of these types of cases, and the way that we handle those is we give you the following advice, we tell you to fill out the following form, and we have you do the following thing. And you're just going by the book. And it requires less brain power and less manpower to do that kind of work. So that's the sort of negative view of the future of the profession, is that increasingly it becomes routinized, and to a certain extent, you need fewer people to do it. The most optimistic thing I can say about the future of the profession is, at a certain point, you start to realize that where we are as a democracy is a time at which we sort of need to go back to basics. The people who wrote the US Constitution, the founding fathers, yes, they were all male and all white, but and we could do with a little bit more diversity on all fronts in terms of the people who have a say in our governance. But increasingly, I think it's pretty clear that we need more say in our governance from smart people who spend some time thinking about it at a professional level. They were all lawyers. They all spent a lot of time thinking about the law and the way in which it ought to work. And if our government is going to continue to have any hope of success moving forward, I think we're going to need to have more people entering the legal profession, studying law, and figuring out ways to put those concepts to use in how it is that we all get along with each other on a day-to-day basis, so that our government continues to serve us effectively and serve us well. So hopefully that at least ends on a very positive note about, or optimistic note about, the profession as a whole. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and go back to what other view is available to me. And I think somebody's going to take a look at the chat and let me know what questions people want answered. Yeah?
Yeah. So first off, thank you so much. Like, I personally really enjoy your talk, and I definitely believe it's super beneficial. But then specifically to questions, like, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. But then as of now, we have 3. And the first one is asked by Jim Wang, and he basically said, what about public defender?
Yes, absolutely. And to the extent that I didn't mention them enough when I was talking about the criminal law aspect, public defenders are essentially part of that system. So you've got prosecutors on the one side, you've got defense attorneys on the other, and then you have public defenders who get assigned to people when you can't afford an attorney. That's part of the Miranda rights, right? If you can't afford an attorney, one will be assigned to you by the court. Because we don't think that anybody should go to jail just because they couldn't afford a lawyer to plead their case for them.
Excuse me, just not to interrupt or anything, my internet connection wasn't that good, and so I was wondering if I could rewatch this online. No offense to interrupt you or not, because I missed a huge amount of this.
Yeah, so so we'll post this entire thing. Yeah, sorry.
Great.
So we'll just post this entire thing on our YouTube channel, and I'll just link it in the chat. Yeah.
Good.
Sorry about the breakup of my internet.
So one more quick word on public defenders. people early on tend to think of public defenders as people who are getting criminals off who really should be going to jail, and their only job is to help people escape from prosecution or the law, no matter what it takes. Well, that's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is, unless somebody's doing that job as diligently as they possibly can, prosecutors can get off easy and can do things by half measures. And so what public defenders do on a day-to-day basis is protect not just their clients' constitutional rights, but everybody's constitutional rights. Abuses of power, and abuses of prosecutorial power in particular, happen when there isn't a strong defender on the other side making sure that if they don't do things properly, if they don't do things by the book, they're going to have to be answerable to somebody. So yeah, public defenders, absolutely vital. We all owe them a huge debt of gratitude because they're out there protecting your rights for very, very little pay. Other questions?
Okay, Jenny asks, how much student debt is there after graduation?
Good question. Law school costs, boy, I'm not sure the last time that I actually looked at it. It's probably up to about $150,000 at this point for the 3 years. You can earn a little bit of that money back in your summers, although usually it's only your second summer that you can get a real job that pays money. First summer, it's usually internships or unpaid internships and things like that. So it's a substantial amount of debt that you're carrying after that. Now, increasingly, there are some programs out there that will help you forgive that debt if you go into some sort of public service area, whether it's becoming, for example, a public defender or working for a state government or something like that. There are other ways of getting that debt forgiven. And there are certainly loan programs that allow you to defer it for some period of time. But mostly, it's at least 6 figures of debt that you walk out of law school with, and that you then have to figure out a way to repay.
Next question is Steph, who asked, is it better to major in a law-related major in undergrad college and then do law school, or is it just law school enough?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's one of my favorite ones to answer. There is no such thing as pre-law, no matter what anybody tells you. There are a lot of people who go to law school after being government majors or history majors or political philosophy majors. It's certainly not necessary. I think it tends to be the case that that's just because they sort of lacked any more imagination. The only thing you need to do as an undergraduate before you go to law school is learn how to write well. So any college major that has you doing a lot of writing is a good one to have. And that's basically any college major. Personally, I was a Russian literature major. I liked reading Russian books, and I thought that was a lot of great fun. And so for 4 years, I did that. The great thing about going to law school is there's a whole bunch of different backgrounds you're going to have to be there and to be successful. Your undergraduate education is not an essential element, except that you absolutely have to learn how to write.
Okay. Howard asks, do most lawyers specialize in certain areas? Are there any lawyers who take cases in multiple areas?
So most lawyers specialize in at least one area with a little bit of spillover, but not necessarily. So there's nobody who's, a real generalist these days is very, very rare. Start with almost all lawyers are either doing corporate work or litigation, although there are some solo practitioners doing like what I do who end up, because they need to bring in a lot of different clients and help a lot of different people, they do some of each. But most lawyers will be either one of those two things primarily. Beyond that, they tend to specialize in one area because it makes them more effective, and it's easier to market yourself and get clients if you say, I have a particular experience with employment law or bankruptcy or whatever else it is. But it's also the case that as times change and things change and issues change, you have to change with them. So there are times where bankruptcy is a very popular area to work in because, of course, there are times when the economy goes bad all of a sudden and a lot of people are going bankrupt. There are also times when the economy is doing fantastically and everybody can pay their bills and very few people are going bankrupt. And those people need to find some other way to attract clients and make money. But the idea that you say, I do all sorts of law is increasingly rare, mostly because it's hard to market yourself. And also because, you tend to be a little bit more effective if you learn sort of a little bit more about one particular area.
So for next question, I feel like you kind of already touched upon it, like for some details, but Spencer asked, does some basic college level knowledge in another field help you as a lawyer? For example, some background in a certain trade, proficiency in computer science, etc. Also, how much does the place where you get your undergrad law degree matter?
So let me start with the first bit of that. In being a lawyer, a huge breadth of experience is important. And one of the things I usually advise people is between college and law school, go do something else for a couple of years maybe, or at least a year. If you're one of those people who doesn't know whether you want to go to law school, then yeah, you should probably work as a paralegal first to see if you actually like it or hate it. But if you're not going to do that, go do something completely different for a year while you're applying to law school, because breadth of experience and anything else you can learn about is of course important. Because one of the things you're doing as a lawyer is helping people with problems. And so I have an ability to learn about whatever industry it is that my clients come from and whatever problems they need me to understand. But it's much easier if I already know a thing or two about that industry. And so I think it's very valuable to have a breadth of knowledge. It's not necessary, but it's certainly very helpful to have this particular area in the field. The other thing is, of course, it makes it easier to market yourself to clients who are in that field. Oh yeah, I know all about engineering. I worked for a couple of years as an engineer. Let me represent you because I understand the particular problems that you're having. As far as place where you get your undergraduate and law degree, it matters for each next step and then not much beyond that, to some degree. So obviously going to a good undergraduate institution helps you get into a better law school, but it's much more important how you did at that undergraduate institution. So you want to make sure that you're picking a college where you can be successful. And that means, picking one that's right for you, that you're going to be happy at, that's the right size, geographic location, everything else. And then how much does your law degree matter to your first job? It matters a fair amount to your first job. It's easier from a better law school. You should go to whatever the best law schools you get into, and that will help you get your first job. After that, it helps some, but not as much as success in your intervening job and recommendations from people and who you know and things like that. So the answer is it's always helpful. I always like to have things on my resume that reflect that, it's still the case that people are going to look down to that part of your resume where your undergraduate and your law school are. So yeah, it's really good to have those be great places. They're always going to matter. But it certainly does not mean that you can't go on to have a very successful, high-paying, satisfying career if you went to something less than the best law school or the best undergraduate institution.
Howard asks, do you ever have to mix expertise or collaborate with other specialists?
Oh, absolutely. You collaborate with people all the time, starting with your clients. So they have to teach me a thing or two about their business, and I have to teach them a thing or two about the law, and then we're going to figure out how to solve this problem together. There's also plenty of instances in which if you're at a law firm, you're working on a team with others. Sometimes you have clients who have been sued along with somebody else, or they have allies or other things like that, where they're other lawyers representing other parties who you have to be in touch with. And then within litigation, we have things called expert witnesses. So sometimes if you have to have somebody who's going to provide your client with advice and even testimony in a specialized area, you have to be able to communicate with that person about what it is that they're going to be providing testimony about. So for example, let's take an eminent domain case. If you're representing somebody whose house was taken and they're trying to get the best fair market value for the house, they hire a lawyer who's going to represent them in that. That lawyer then hires an appraiser who's going to testify, this house was actually worth this amount of money. Well, the lawyer has to be able to understand what it is that the appraiser was doing when they made that determination, so they can ask them questions on direct examination, so they can cross-examine the other one in the course of the trial. That's one of the coolest things about being a litigator, is that you get to learn about a whole bunch of different areas in the course of doing what you do.
Jen asked our final question: what kind of GPA in college needed to go to law school next, and how hard is it to pass the bar exam?
Kind of GPA is needed to go to law school. To go to law school, you don't need any particular bar. It's just a question of that a higher GPA is going to help you get into a better law school. There are all sorts of law schools in the United States. There are all sorts of law schools within Massachusetts. It's probably the case that, unless you had a really wretched GPA from any particular institution, you can get into some law school someplace, probably. So having a higher GPA will allow you to get into a better law school, which is what you really want to do, both because you'll get a better education and because it'll make it easier to get jobs after that. How hard is it to pass the bar exam? My torts professor in law school said that the bar exam might as well be a very, very hard geography test, because it mostly involves memorizing a whole bunch of things, figuring out how to take that particular test. It's a test unlike any you've taken before it or will take after it. You spend a few months of your life taking a review course and studying for it and doing almost nothing else for that period of time to make sure that you pass the exam. If you've got a good brain on your shoulders, if you did this for the right reasons, if you went to law school and you paid attention and you actually take the studying seriously, you will pass the bar exam. And there are occasionally people who flunk it the first time and then go ahead and take it a second or third, and that's what it takes, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, that's not your biggest concern about becoming a lawyer, is passing the bar exam. It is at the time, but it's not that big a deal.
That's basically all of our questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, and this is definitely a very fruitful talk. Yeah. And thank you so much to everyone who came. So this entire video will be posted on our YouTube channel, and I already posted a link to the channel on the chat box, so feel free to subscribe. But thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you all for coming to hear my pitch, and good luck to everybody. And yeah, I hope that you have a better understanding of what it's like to wake up in the morning and be a lawyer.
What's the YouTube channel name again?
I linked it in the chat box.
Oh, thank you, thanks.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you everyone for coming again. Thank you, Mr. McGuire, for being our first guest speaker.
Thanks for having me.
And
Take
yeah.
care.
Bye.
Bye.